Your soulmate is trying to tell you something important. Please read this message. Something in the silence between two people has a way of saying what words are too afraid to admit. And tonight, there's a message sitting beneath the surface of your soulmate's heart, something they've replayed in their mind more times than you could ever know. Imagine them alone for a moment, phone resting in their hand, staring at your name without pressing it. They start typing. Stop. Delete. Type again. Because what they want to tell you isn't casual. It isn't something they can simply say and move on from. There's emotion behind it. There's hesitation. And there's one truth they've been carrying quietly because they're still trying to find the right way to reveal it. You may have noticed the subtle changes lately, the pauses, the unusual distance followed by unexpected warmth, the feeling that something is being left unsaid. Maybe you wondered if you were imagining it. You weren't imagining the shift. Something has been building. And here's where this becomes much more interesting. Your soulmate may not be struggling with whether they care about you. That part may already be settled inside them. What they're struggling with is how much of themselves they're finally willing to show you. There's a difference. One evening, they could be surrounded by noise, people talking, notifications lighting up their screen, life moving around them. And yet their attention keeps returning to one thought, you. Not because they're trying to escape their present, but because you represent a conversation they know they can't postpone forever. There's something they want you to understand about their behavior, about their silence, and perhaps most importantly, about what has been happening inside them when nobody else is watching. One detail matters here: they may have realized that simply hoping you'll understand them isn't enough anymore. At some point, they have to communicate. And that realization is pushing them toward a message that could sound very different from what you expect. Stay with this, because the next layer changes the meaning of everything. The message your soulmate is trying to send may begin with something surprisingly simple, not a dramatic confession, not some perfectly rehearsed speech, but an honest admission they've struggled to say out loud. They want you to know that their silence did not necessarily mean a lack of feeling. Sometimes silence comes from having too many feelings and not knowing which one deserves to be spoken first. Picture the moment they finally decide to stop editing themselves. Their shoulders relax. Their expression changes. They take one slow breath and begin writing what they really mean. And somewhere in those first few words is the reason they've been acting differently. But there's another sentence waiting behind it, one they almost didn't include because it reveals far more than they intended. That sentence could explain why this connection has stayed on their mind, why they keep returning to you emotionally, and why they feel that something between you still deserves to be understood. And when you discover what they've been trying to say beneath all those pauses, you may realize the message was never just about what they want from you. It was about what they finally want you to know about them. Something shifted the moment they finally admitted the truth to themselves. It wasn't loud. There was no dramatic announcement, no perfect movie scene. It was quieter than that. They were simply going through an ordinary moment when your memory appeared unexpectedly, and instead of pushing it away, they stayed with it. For once, they allowed themselves to feel everything they had been avoiding. The good memories. The unanswered questions. The moments when they almost reached out. And then came the realization that mattered most: they don't want you guessing anymore. They don't want you interpreting every pause, every delayed response, or every change in their energy. They want to tell you what's actually happening inside them. That's why this message feels different. It isn't coming from a passing emotion. It's coming from someone who has spent time thinking, reconsidering, and finally understanding what your presence means to them. And there's one part of this message they've been especially nervous about sharing. Here's the part you may not expect. Your soulmate could be trying to tell you that you affected them in a way they didn't see coming. Not necessarily through one huge moment, but through the little things. A sentence you said. The way you listened. The patience you showed when you could have walked away. Perhaps even something you did without realizing it became a memory they carried much longer than expected. And recently, one of those memories may have resurfaced with unusual intensity. It reminded them of the version of themselves they were before they met you, and the version they're becoming now. That realization can be powerful because it forces someone to ask a difficult question. What if I've been treating something important like it was temporary? That question may be exactly why they've become more thoughtful lately. They're not simply thinking about what happened before. They're thinking about what could happen next. And if you felt that strange sense that a conversation is approaching, don't dismiss it too quickly. There may be more behind that feeling than you realize. And if this message is already speaking to something you've been feeling, you can quietly share this video with someone who might need to hear it too, or leave a comment with the one word that describes what your heart has been waiting for. Because now we reach the part that makes this message especially important. Your soulmate isn't only trying to explain their feelings, they may be preparing to tell you what they actually need from this connection. That could be reassurance, honesty, patience, a second chance to communicate differently, or simply the opportunity to stop pretending that everything is ordinary when, inside, it isn't. Imagine the moment they finally look at your name and decide they're done rehearsing the conversation in their head. Their fingers move across the screen. One sentence appears. They read it twice. Then they almost erase it. But they don't. Because the sentence says something they can no longer keep hidden, they want you to know where they truly stand. And the next words they choose may reveal why this connection has remained so difficult for them to put into the past, or so impossible for them to ignore. Something happened inside them when they realized that waiting for the perfect moment was becoming another way of avoiding the conversation. They had imagined saying it differently. Maybe during a long conversation late at night. Maybe after seeing you again. Maybe through a message carefully written and rewritten until every emotion sounded safe. But real feelings rarely wait for perfect timing. One ordinary moment can suddenly make everything impossible to ignore. And that may be what happened here. They remembered something you once said, something that seemed small at the time, yet somehow stayed with them. It made them wonder whether you ever understood just how deeply your presence affected them. That question has been following them. And now, instead of asking what you might think, they're beginning to ask themselves something more important. What happens if I never tell them? That question has created a sense of urgency, not panic, not pressure, but the quiet realization that some truths become heavier the longer they remain unspoken. There's another detail you need to notice. Your soulmate may be trying to communicate through actions before they communicate through words. Watch for the subtle things. Remembering details you assumed they forgot, finding reasons to keep a conversation going, becoming unusually attentive when you speak, or suddenly bringing up subjects that seem connected to your future. These moments can look insignificant from the outside, but emotionally, they may represent someone testing the waters. They're trying to discover whether it feels safe to be honest with you. They may even be wondering whether you still care enough to hear what they have to say. And that uncertainty can explain why their message has taken so long to arrive. They don't want to send something meaningless. They want their words to matter. More importantly, they want to know that when they finally open that door, you won't immediately close it. That's why the message forming in their mind may contain less performance and more vulnerability than you expect. And there's one particular question they may be carrying that could completely change the conversation. Think about this carefully. What if the message isn't really, "Do you still feel something for me?" What if it's closer to, "Can we finally talk honestly about what this means to both of us?" That difference matters. Because asking for attention is one thing. Asking for an honest conversation is something much deeper. It means they're willing to hear your side, too. They may have spent enough time imagining your reaction and now realize they can't know the answer without actually speaking to you. So they're preparing themselves for a moment where there are no rehearsed lines left, no convenient excuses, and no hiding behind silence. The next step may begin with a simple message, perhaps only a few words, but behind those words could be months of thought, emotion, and hesitation. And when that conversation finally begins, there's something they may reveal first, something about why they held back for so long. Once you understand that reason, you may see their silence through an entirely different lens. Something changed in the way they looked at your name when they realized they were no longer afraid of the answer. For a long time, the uncertainty may have felt safer than the truth. As long as they stayed quiet, they could keep imagining every possible outcome. But now the questions have become louder than the fear. What if you knew how often they thought about you? What if you knew how many times they almost reached out? What if you knew that some of their strongest emotions were happening in moments when you had no idea they were thinking about you at all? That is the part they've been trying to explain. They aren't simply carrying a feeling. They're carrying a conversation they haven't finished having with you. And recently, they may have reached a point where keeping everything inside feels more difficult than being vulnerable. Imagine them sitting somewhere quiet, staring at a blank screen, knowing exactly who they want to contact. This time, they don't immediately put the phone down. There's a reason their message may feel unusually sincere when it finally arrives. They've been thinking about what they want you to understand, not just what they want to say. That distinction reveals maturity. They may want you to know that some of their past behavior came from uncertainty, not indifference. Maybe they needed time to understand their own emotions. Maybe they were afraid of moving too quickly and damaging something meaningful. Maybe they didn't know whether you felt the same depth they felt. But now, they're beginning to understand that protecting themselves from disappointment also meant protecting themselves from connection. And that realization can change everything. Suddenly, memories that once felt confusing begin making sense. A conversation that ended too quickly. A moment when they looked like they wanted to say more. A message that arrived at an unexpected time. A question they asked that seemed strangely personal. None of these moments alone proves anything, but together, they may reveal someone who has been emotionally closer to the truth than they ever admitted. And before you leave this part, there's one thing worth remembering. Sometimes the most important message isn't the longest one. It's the sentence someone finally becomes brave enough to say. Your soulmate may have an entire explanation prepared, but underneath all of it could be one simple desire: to know whether the door between you is still open for an honest conversation. If you've been waiting for clarity, this may be why the energy around this connection has felt different lately. They're no longer only looking backward. They're considering what could happen if both of you stopped guessing and started communicating. And if you've ever wondered whether they notice the small things about you, there may be one specific memory they keep returning to because it revealed something they couldn't unsee afterward. That memory may explain why their feelings became stronger when they least expected it. So if you're still here, stay with this. Because the next part of their message moves beyond what they feel, and into what they may finally be ready to do about it. And if this story reminds you of something happening in your own life, you're welcome to subscribe and stay connected for more stories like this. Sometimes the message we need most arrives through a story we didn't expect to hear. Something almost slipped out of their mouth the other day, and for a second, they looked like they had forgotten to protect the secret they had been carrying. It was only a moment. A pause in the conversation. A change in their expression. Then they quickly moved on, as if nothing had happened. But that tiny reaction may have revealed more than a long confession ever could. Because beneath the calm exterior, they'd been reaching a decision. They don't want to keep giving you pieces of the truth and expecting you to assemble the entire picture yourself. They want to explain. They want you to understand why certain moments felt confusing, why they sometimes came closer and then pulled back, and why your presence still seems to affect them when they thought they had everything under control. There's a message forming behind those contradictions. And the closer they get to saying it, the harder it becomes for them to pretend that this connection is something ordinary. But here's what makes their message different from everything you may have imagined. They may not be coming to you with a perfect promise. They may be coming with something more valuable: honesty. They want to admit that they don't have every answer yet. They may still have questions. They may still be figuring out how to express what they feel without making everything complicated. But one thing has become increasingly clear to them: they don't want uncertainty to speak on their behalf anymore. They would rather tell you the truth than let silence create a story that isn't real. And perhaps the most meaningful part is that they're beginning to understand your perspective, too. They've wondered what their behavior looked like from your side. They've considered the possibility that you may have felt overlooked, confused, or unsure of where you stood. That realization has made them rethink the way they communicate. Because if they truly want something meaningful with you, they know they can't expect you to read their mind. There's a scene you can almost picture. Late evening. The room is quiet. Their phone is beside them. They open the conversation, type a few words, stop, and stare at the screen. Then they write again. This time, they don't delete it. The message begins simply, but as they continue, their guard starts coming down. They mentioned something they've never properly explained. Something connected to the way they felt during a particular moment between you. And suddenly, the entire tone changes. It isn't about proving anything anymore. It's about being understood. That may be the real reason this message matters so much. Your soulmate could be trying to tell you, there was more behind my silence than you knew. And if that sentence ever reaches you, don't rush past it. Because behind those words may be the explanation for one of the biggest misunderstandings between you. And once that misunderstanding is finally addressed, the conversation could move towards something neither of you expected when this story first began. Something finally became clear when they stopped asking themselves what you might say and started asking what they would regret never telling you. That question hit differently. It didn't demand an immediate answer. It simply exposed the truth they had been avoiding. They could keep waiting for the right circumstances, or they could finally become honest about what had been sitting in their heart. And somewhere in that quiet decision, their message began to change. It wasn't just about explaining the past anymore. It was about making sure you understood what they mean now. They may want to tell you that their feelings didn't disappear simply because they weren't always visible. Some emotions become quieter when they become deeper. They don't need constant attention to remain real. That may be why this connection has continued occupying their thoughts even during ordinary days, busy schedules, and moments when they tried to focus on everything else. Then they remembered something about you that they had almost forgotten, and suddenly, the words they needed became much easier to find. The surprising part is what that memory revealed. It wasn't necessarily a romantic moment. It could have been something incredibly simple, the way you encouraged them when they doubted themselves, the way you noticed when something was wrong without demanding an explanation, or the way you made an ordinary moment feel lighter. Those details can stay with someone because they reveal character. And your soulmate may have realized that what they miss most isn't simply a particular conversation or a particular day. It's the feeling of being understood without having to perform. That realization may be why they're becoming more intentional now. They don't want to approach you with empty words or emotional confusion. They want their message to carry meaning. They want you to know that when they say they've been thinking about you, they mean more than a passing thought. They've been reconsidering choices, replaying conversations, and imagining what an honest conversation between you could look like. But there's still one hesitation remaining, and it has everything to do with your response. Because what they fear most may not be rejection. It may be discovering that they waited too long. They may wonder whether you've already changed, whether your heart has moved forward, or whether you still have room for the conversation they've been preparing to start. And that uncertainty explains the careful way they've been approaching this. They're looking for a sign. Not necessarily a dramatic one, but some indication that honesty would be welcomed rather than misunderstood. So when the message finally comes, pay attention to what happens after the first few words. The opening may seem simple, but the meaning could deepen as they reveal why they chose this moment to speak. They may tell you something they've never said before, something that connects the past with the future they've quietly imagined. And that revelation could answer the question you've been carrying since the beginning: why now? Why are they suddenly trying so hard to make sure you understand? The answer may be closer than you think, and it may be the most vulnerable thing they've been trying to say all along. Something about the way they're approaching this conversation has changed completely. They're no longer searching for the perfect words. They're searching for the courage to use the honest ones. And that distinction matters, because the message they've been holding back may finally be reaching the point where it can no longer remain unfinished. Imag.